Work Services Committee on Thursday the 10th of May. I'll just remind you that this meeting may be recorded and subsequently made available for public listening. So with that in mind, if you could also turn your mobile phones to silent or vibrate or something as well, that'd be really helpful. We've got an agenda in front of us, so without further ado, could I take a note of the Sederunt and apologies, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We've got 13 members present this morning, a number of apologies from Councillor Ian Crothers, Councillor Karen Crothers, David Ingalls, Gail McGregor, Tommy Sloan and Ronnie Tate. We have David James and Andrew Wood currently not present.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest from members? None for the record. We are now on item 3. We have the minute of meeting of 15th of March for approval. Happy to take any? Yep, thank you. Item 4 then is public protection. This is the implementation of partnership structure across Dumfries and Galloway, and we have Gordon Pattinson here to speak to this. I think we have to technically agree to receive a presentation. Are we happy to do that? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. This is just to give an update on the public protection partnership in terms of changes that we have first of all reviewed, and then the changes that we will be implementing. Now we have a date for our first revised meeting structure on the 18th of June. So I'll just give a bit of background, and then I'll give an overview of where we've been, and then I'll open up for any questions. So in terms of the public protection, it was agreed previously that we required a stringent review of public protection, and that review was undertaken in 2017 between sort of March and August when we consulted. But prior to that, the review, they wished to look at the number of strategic level partnerships that were across public protection. At the time, there were about 6 or so partnerships with various sub-structures that sat under that. And they wanted to develop a clear coordinated strategy across public protection and enhance relationships between thematic issues and individual cases. Increasingly, they were finding that it was difficult to pigeonhole for a case to be child protection or adult protection or whatever. There increasingly were crosses across both of those, all those areas. They wanted to make sure there were smooth transitions between them. So what they wanted was to make sure that it was appropriate to protect those at risk and from those who pose the risk, and the structures that we had in place and were implemented, to assure both public chief officers and yourselves that issues were being addressed and being addressed effectively and appropriately, but also to reduce duplication across the agenda and for staff. In terms, this is where we had, in terms of when we started the review, I suppose there were 6 partnerships, all sort of categorised under sort of public protection. All had been set up sort of individually on their own. Differences in terms of, I suppose, resource, in terms of structures that sat underneath them, and timescales, how long they had been in progress. For example, there were 6 formal groups, but 16 subcommittees sat under that, and the nature of Dumfries and Galloway is there's a lot of the same persons attending each of the same groups. So in terms of challenges and findings that we undertook in terms of the review, it was clear that public protection is a wicked problem. By that we mean a wicked problem is basically a problem that we don't think will ever be resolved in terms of for adult protection, child protection and violence against women and girls, but it's also extremely difficult to achieve if tackled by any single organisation. So it's very much strong partnership working across all of these areas in terms of how we take things forward, and commitment from obviously local authority, health, police, etc. And it's clear that effective communication was vital in public protection to foster commitment to partnership working. And I'll explain how each of these challenges that we had are hopefully going to be addressed within the new structure that we will implement. We found there was obviously inconsistent attendance at core partnerships, which potentially reduced the authority of the groups, and again that was something we wish to address within the new structure. And I mentioned before we wanted to remove duplication from the same attendees attending same meeting or different meetings. And we wanted to reaffirm leadership, governance and scrutiny. We have already moved to a single chair who sits across Adult Protection Committee and Child Protection Committee to have that joint leadership. And again, as I mentioned there, we found that inconsistent resources due to the partnerships being set up at different times. So in terms of the way forward, this has been agreed by us with the Chief Officers Group, that we would have, there would no longer be an individual child protection committee, an adult protection committee, or a domestic abuse violence against women partnership. Those agenda would therefore be owned by a single public protection committee, which would have an independent chair. That committee would report into the Chief Officers Group for Public Protection, and it would also link in closely with both our Alcohol and Drugs Partnership, EDP, MAPA, Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements, looks at high-risk offenders, which sits across South West Scotland at the moment, and the Dumfries and Galloway Community Justice Partnership would also be represented on that group, but that committee would have ownership for the three agenda. Underneath that would be various sort of subcommittees identified for practice improvement, performance and quality, and learning and development, and under those would be standing groups. So this will reduce, I suppose, the number of formal groups that sit under it in terms of subcommittees and committees, and it'll address a number of the issues that we identified, and I'll explain these as we go on. So in terms of primary aims of the partnership, it's really about strategic development and delivery of services to the most vulnerable adults and children who are at risk of significant harm. So it's quite clear it's got a priority for child protection, adult support protection, and violence against women and girls. So it's dedicated and have a specific remit on those protection issues, and it'll have an overview of all protection work. Focus on high-risk groups and ensure effective arrangements are in place to manage those areas of overlap. As I mentioned before, cases often may be involved in terms of for violence against women and girls or domestic abuse, may also be an adult support protection issue, also child protection issues as well. So again, it's looking more at having an ownership of public protection rather than looking at cases within silos. As I mentioned there, it'll look at the effective discharge of our public protection activity and what we have to do in terms of all those areas through a single strategic oversight and performance review as well. And a clear operational focus on the identification and management of risk towards those who are vulnerable and also those who potentially pose risk. Ensuring response are timely, proportionate and targeted. So that's the primary aims of the partnership. So there'll be a clearer focus on, in terms of all the groups, smarter planning in terms of and also reduced number of priorities, making sure that priorities we have are focused and where they're linked and closely across the agenda they can be. Again, but ensuring priorities are realistic and yet ambitious and achievable, and make sure we focus on those that we need to prioritise. We also need to be linked to national and also our local agenda for change, how the partnership interacts with other public protection partnerships and other wider partnerships across the council area. Again, it's very much outcome focused, making a difference, and I'll explain how it will function in terms of the engine room for the partnership in a second. Again, it's standardisation. Again, it's reducing duplication of both the top and middle of the structure, and it's a better alignment of shared agendas. I'm aware I've gone through that quite quickly. So, in terms of implementing that, there was a significant, that's quite a significant change from what we had previously. They implemented our public protection implementation group, which I suppose examined in detail the previous structure that was presented to the Chief Officers Group, and said, right, we now have a date of when we need to implement this, and we need to work back and have an implementation strategy of how we do that. So that's a multi-agency group attended by all, I suppose, responsible authorities across Dumfries and Galloway. Again, that group also didn't look at things like what do we need to change, also looked at things like what have worked well across the three areas and have proven to work well, and can then share that best practice as well. As I mentioned, best practice. And it was agreed what was, I suppose, required in Dumfries and Galloway in terms of priorities. So it was tested via discussion across all partnerships. About, okay, this is linking, make sure we link our strategy, make sure we link that effectively into practice. The aim of the partnership very much is to make sure that the operational benefits for those who work on the coalface and such out across localities. And it would also, the group also outline detailed roles and responsibilities of the groups that would sit underneath the committee. So in terms of some of the proposed changes, that implementation group, initially there were 5 subcommittees proposed under the partnership. Again, that's been reduced further down to 3, merging some of the work across adult protection, child protection, violence against women and girls under practice improvement, which also links effectively into the performance and quality and the learning and development. And that again made sure we had a more joined up approach across public protection. It was being brave, I suppose, in terms of going further down the line of integrating across the 3 areas of public protection rather than still having subcommittees for each of the areas. We would now have short life working groups will be the structures which will drive a lot of the practice and delivery forward, and they'll deliver key tasks within the timescales, and they'll particularly deliver on a range of policy and practice priorities. So a lot of the groups have sat and met and kept going. The short life working groups that I'll detail in a minute will meet. They'll have a set criteria, a set timescale, and then deliver back, and that'll be it's about being more effective in the meetings that we need to have. Again, that just shows the links in terms of the subcommittees that we have under public protection for performance and quality, which will look at audits, for example, practice improvement, and also look at the implementing of changes that are required, and learning development training, and then they'll be audited again. So it's quite cyclical nature of the plan that we're putting in place. Again, I know I really appreciate that's hard to read, and it's very much just to indicate that in terms of blue, they are the initial ongoing short life working groups. This is a structure that we intend or we expect will change. It will be fluid. As a short life working group is completed and no longer required, it will then be removed. And if we require another different working group, it will then be identified. So the bit at the top of the diagram is your formal public protection structure. The bottom is more the engine room of how we will effectively implement and take things forward. So in terms of principles that we're taking forward for this model, it will be membership will focus on role required. Both memberships of the Public Protection Committee and for the subcommittees have tried to move away from the usual suspects. Well, that's a public protection issue, or that'll be so-and-so, they'll attend that. It's making sure the memberships, actually people there who we require, can bring something to the table, can bring something different to the table as well. And part of that, we're looking potential of the subcommittees, potentially to have core members and associate members of groups. Again, it's hopefully not having people at meetings they may not require to be to, and obviously ensuring that we can have that commitment when we require people to attend and to contribute. And making sure they're obviously of optimal size. One of the dangers obviously of bringing things together is you end up with larger groups. So we're being quite strict and detailed in terms of who we require to be a member. And I've mentioned that before, a focus will firmly remain on children, families and service users, and that will be built into all plans that we take forward. And subcommittee chairs will mandate authority, again, just ensuring commitment from all partners and all partnership members who will be leading and delivering on work. Let's make sure members lead and deliver on work rather than, for example, individual persons who've always had that remit. Again, I mentioned before, it's outcome-focused agenda. And then obviously accountability is both individual for the members, but also collective for the Public Protection Committee as a whole. Some of the challenges, just to sort of quickly finish off, obviously the structure of the actual meeting of the committee by bringing 3 smaller committees together is also making sure we can still effectively work and operate. Now looking at 3 agendas, and that will be quite, the chair, independent chair, is quite clear on that. That's one of her challenges, to make sure the agenda is appropriate. And obviously at the moment, existing committees are at different stages of development in terms of, for example, data recording, data collection, data analysis, child protection, to adult support and protection, violence against women and girls. So the challenges of bringing committees together with the aim of ensuring that we raise all to the appropriate and same standard. In part that's due to how the partnerships have been, how long they've been operating as well. I mentioned appropriate subcommittee membership and very much self-evaluation. We will evaluate the structure within 6 months, and again probably 12 months as well, just to make sure that the changes we're implementing are working effectively. And we will obviously have, prior to the implementation, first meeting of the 18th of June, partnership and subcommittee development sessions. And obviously we've now got, there's a period of transition where each of the previous committees will have their final meeting, and then we'll move that forward into the following up for the new structure. Just finishing off, I was aware at the last committee there was a discussion about and they're asked to bring back, I suppose, information on the Adult Protection Committee workshop that was dated October 17. There was an update on that plan. I think they commented it was quite extensive. There is an appendix within your papers which maybe gives slightly more detail, but it's just to really add that a lot of these are being complete or are being taken forward and now will act for the whole of the Public Protection Committee. For example, induction packs, shadowing members more experienced, commitment to take responsibility, etc. So a lot of these will be taken forward and now become under the good practice, I suppose, for the Public Protection Committee as well. But I'm aware there was a request to bring that back to this committee So it's in Appendix 3 of your papers. And that's the end of the quite quick input. I'm happy to take any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Gordon. An informative presentation. I've got questions from Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Chair. I was quite interested to listen to the presentation regarding attendance. So you're dropping your subcommittees from 5 to 3. Obviously, looking at 100 meetings a year. Interesting. Are you doing any joint workingship with any other local authorities? And looking at the membership of the committee here on page 9 to page 50, is that the same as other local authorities like Lothian and Borders and Glasgow? Is it the same? Are you working with any other local authorities on the public protection side?
Yep. What has actually just come out recently is the draft Child Protection Committee guidance, which has reviewed the required membership of the who attend, for example, the Child Protection Committee. And as this Public Protection Committee will have that formal remit, a lot of guidance is taken from that structure. In terms of attendance, it was often that there were 2 or 3 people who had a single area and it was duplicating. So one out of 3 would attend, or 2 out of 3 would attend. But now we're kind of looking at a higher level of attendance. We've kind of got people there who are there for a specific reason. So that's why it's quite a detailed membership, and that the level has been raised, I suppose, to those senior managers who can make those decisions at a time. And so that level of membership is uniform across Scotland, and will be in the new guidance as well.
Councillor Dougie Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Gordon, thanks very much for the presentation, and I think the new arrangements for public protection are very welcome. In your presentation, you showed us a slide with all the various groups and organisations who contributed towards public protection previously.
Yes.
There'll be a wealth of knowledge and experience there. Can you confirm, have all of these groups and organisations signed up to the new arrangements, or are there any gaps as a result of any particular area of work that's previously been carried out that needs to be taken into consideration?
In terms of all the groups that were the 6 that were detailed, they've had minimum 1, possibly 2 updates, formal presentations from myself in terms of the new arrangements. I think I actually sit on all of those groups. So there's definitely been a consultation. As part of the consultation period, which ran from March to August last year, feedback was welcomed, and that's what those presentations were part of that. In terms of memberships, again, there will be some staff who are maybe on one of those committees and are maybe not now, which is why we've kind of raised the level of the formal committee, but we've also raised the level of the subcommittees as well, and they'll do a lot more of the work and report forward. So member staff who may have been on a Child Protection Committee may now be more appropriate for them to be on Performance and Quality Subcommittee to take that word forward. So definitely all being consulted, and we expect all to be still to be involved in different guises, potentially in the new structure, but short working groups, subcommittees, or the Public Protection Committee itself. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you. Yes, I found this extremely interesting, and I think definitely the right way to travel. Can I just ask about on page 13, you also had the slide up there with respect to the public protection structure. The Dumfries and Galloway Chief Officers Group, Public Protection, then you've got arrows going up to the Community Planning Partnership and the Health and Social Care Partnership. And I wonder if you can possibly explain what the arrows actually mean. What is I'm really getting at the lines of accountability and how this sits, where this sits.
For the formal public protection structure, I suppose the arrows up the way, I suppose, point in terms of who these groups would report to. For example, the Public Protection Committee, the independent chair, would sit and report to the Chief Officers Group Public Protection on a quarterly basis. So it'd report up. In terms of there are some arrows there that go, I suppose, horizontally and are dotted lines. That is, they're not accountable, for example, sideways as such, but the Community Justice Partnership, the MAPA SOG and the ADP would all be on the Public Protection Committee as members. So I suppose where there's information, a requirement for information flow back and forward between those partnerships to make sure that any decisions are fully informed. Sorry.
Councillor Maitland, I wonder if I could just confirm that that's for governance and assurance purpose. So the Chief Officers Group would report to both those partnerships for information and assurance.
Sorry, Jane Maitland, if you want to come back.
Would you let me? What I was really also going to ask about is, thank you for bringing the report number 3, the action plan. This is the business plan in paragraph 1. The document design will be a single document to allow both biannual reporting and business planning. And what I really sort of want to get at it is, who's actually responsible? You know, is it us here? Is it the IJB? Is it who actually examines what is happening, and with respect to public protection?
As far as it's the Chief Officers Group, which is a multi-agency group chaired by our Chief Executive, also the Chief Superintendent from Police, Chief Executive of NHS, Dumfries and Galloway, and the Chief Officer of the IGB. So they're the 4 Chief Officers who hold to account. And I think they've appointed an independent convener also to have that accountability, to be able to report on their behalf and to them.
And then maybe this is a question to Lillian, in terms of political accountability. If you could explain that, please.
Certainly the COGS will report to the planning partnership, and we will bring regular reports back to this committee.
I've got a couple of questions myself. I can't see any other hands raised just now, but one was just about the lifespan of short life working groups. So obviously under the current structure there's some who would be answerable up through the various governance pathways, if you like. I presume that the plan is they'll be sort of subsumed or morphed into that as a kind of transition, as you talked about.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering how that would work in terms of how is the lifespan of those groups now going to be determined, for example?
Yep. In terms of the short life working groups that were put up on the previous slide, there's quite a number there. That is making sure that we take the work forward that is currently ongoing. So there's quite a few there that we require still to be ongoing until they finish the piece of work that they're doing. There are a couple there, for example, Adult Support and Protection and Child Protection have their own their steering groups for the MASH, multi-agency safeguarding hubs. There is, for example, an expectation over time they may become one group, which is why they're kind of the short life working group structure is quite fluid. But we're very clear in terms of when a new short life working group is going to be established. It'll be given a clear remit, a clear membership, clear direction, but also very much a clear timescale of when that work needs to be completed. I think one of the feedbacks in consultation is short life working groups were dragging on, becoming long-term working groups, and clearly that wasn't effective. So by being held to account to have a certain timescale, it's making sure that they're far more dynamic in terms of driving things forward. But over time, a lot of the ones that were described previously we look to merge between the child protection and adult protection where appropriate as well.
Thank you. The other final thing, and it touches on a subject that's been raised at the last few committees, which is to do with CPOs. Now, this is very tenuous because obviously the Community Justice Partnership now features in the new structure as going forward. But we were hoping to, at some point, see a report. And I think Lillian's got an offer that she can make to members of the committee while we're waiting for that.
Thanks, Chair. Members will be aware that there's currently an embargo with regards to the community payback report. That embargo remains in place from the Scottish Government. So in terms of giving assurance to members, I was proposing that during recess, if any member of the committee or beyond would like to spend some time with the unpaid work teams or have a look at some of the projects, then I'm more than happy to coordinate and arrange that to give members that assurance, and we could give local information as to what projects were undertaken within each area, but I can't give the overview as it stands just now.
Thank you. I hope that various members will be able to take up the local offers and if they're available during that time. With that then, if there's no further questions, I'll be happy to go to the recommendations, which is to note the progress towards the implementation of the Public Protection Committee as detailed, and note the update on Adult Support and Protection Workshop as detailed in Appendix 3. Noted. Thank you. Next up, I'm sure we're all excited to see the Health and Social Care Clinical and Care Governance reporting. So I'd like to welcome Julie White, who's here to speak to the report. What we've been asked to do is note the information that's going to be provided and consider whether there's any matters to be referred back to the Dumfries and Galloway Integration Board for consideration. I think really we're here to, given the information we've got in front of us, and we don't know yet what we're going to be presented with, this is an opportunity to raise areas of concern. So with that, if I could introduce Julie, and if you want to take it away.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to come along today to Social Work Services Committee to update you on the work of the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. As members will be aware, the integration scheme for health and social care integration across Dumfries and Galloway set out the requirements for the professional oversight of the functions that are delegated to the IJB from both the local authority and the NHS. And it was agreed through the integration scheme that the professional oversight of those services that are delegated would be undertaken through the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. So this committee, that Clinical and Care Governance Committee, is a formal standing committee of the IJB, which meets quarterly at the moment. The role of the Clinical and Care Governance Committee is to have that oversight of the quality and effectiveness of the services that are delegated to the IJB, and it includes issues such as looking at risks, risk management, service user feedback, issues around if we've had any inspection activity, so feedback from inspection activity, feedback around professional registration and validation, and continuous improvement work within the Health and Social Care Partnership. So the Clinical and Care Governance Committee reports to the IJB and provides assurance to the IJB around the quality and the safety of the services that are delivered via the Health and Social Care Partnership. Given that the function of the Clinical and Care Governance Committee is to provide assurances around the quality and the safety and the effectiveness of those services from both health and the local authority, there are 3 lead professional officers that are around the Clinical and Care Governance Committee table. Lillian Kringles is there as the Chief Social Work Officer and providing that professional leadership from social work perspective. Eddie Docherty, who's the Executive Nurse Director, covers issues pertaining to nursing and allied health professionals. And Dr Ken Donaldson, who's the Medical Director for the NHS Board, provides that professional oversight and assurance in relation to medical matters. It was also agreed at this committee on the 15th of March that the committee agreed to receive reports initially 3 times a year from the Clinical and Care Governance Committee to provide you with assurance that the right sorts of issues were being discussed at the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. So you have as an appendix to the paper that Lillian produced, you have as an appendix the agenda for the meeting on the 23rd of April. And you will see from that agenda that that was a very thorough meeting in terms of the range of services that were discussed at that meeting. So it covered issues such as social work comments, complaints and compliments, but also under the patient services report, we looked at all of the patient and service user feedback within health for the functions that are delegated to the IJB. We also received a report on the external scrutiny of regulated adult social care services, and that report particularly related to the external scrutiny of the ARCs and the CAS service. We also received a report in relation to improving safety and reducing harm within the Community Health and Social Care Directorate. So that's the directorate that covers the 4 localities. And that report covered issues such as risks, adverse events, and improvement work within the directorate. We also received a report on a review of day services for older people that's been undertaken within the Health and Social Care Partnership. Now, that wasn't the outcome of that report. That was just to give members information about the review itself. And that review is looking at voluntary day centres, daycare within care homes and dementia daycare across Dumfries and Galloway, looking at the current and future needs, looking at our existing models of care and looking at what potential future service provision may look like. And that the output of that piece of work will be presented to the next meeting of the Clinical and Care Governance Committee in July. We also had a report on the Older People's Consultation Group, and that was around the refreshing of the membership of that group and to ensure that that group had governance routes into the IJB and the Health and Social Care Partnership. And the Clinical and Care Governance Committee agreed to receiving an annual report from the Older People's Consultative Group to the Clinical and Care Governance Group. We also received reports in relation to changes or transformation work that's been undertaken in Wigtonshire within the Health and Social Care Partnership. And that was just again providing Clinical and Care Governance Committee with a report on the work that is to be undertaken. It isn't an output yet, that work has just commenced with the appointment of an independent chair and a project manager. And that was just really informing Clinical and Care Governance Committee that was being undertaken. We also, as the Clinical and Care Governance Committee is responsible for receiving assurance around the quality and the safety of all of the functions delegated, we received a report around healthcare associated infection, and that really was covering rates of the likes of your C. difficile rates, so your infection rates within healthcare, and to provide assurance that all work was being done to minimise healthcare associated infection across the Health and Social Care Partnership. And finally, there was a report by Lillian as the Chief Social Work Officer, which basically brought forward the report that you received on the 15th of March, highlighting that we would be feeding outcomes from the Clinical and Care Governance Committee into Social Work Services Committee, as well as the IJB, to give assurances about the breadth and depth and detail of the work that will be presented to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. So that's just a quick run through verbally of the issues that were discussed at the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. Clearly, those were issues that are pertinent at this point in time. Importantly, I think for members to recognise the range of issues that will be discussed at Clinical and Care Governance Committee, as I highlighted, including things like risk management, service user feedback, standards, complaints, professional registration, inspection activity, everything that relates to the quality and safety of care of those services and functions that are delegated to the IJB. I would be really keen to hear if there are any matters or any issues that you would like, as a Social Work Services Committee, referred back to the IJB and the Clinical and Care Governance Committee for consideration. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair, that anyone might have on it.
Thanks very much, Julie. I think all of us here probably want to make sure that the work that we do at committees and the business that we have is meaningful, and that we have some kind of role to play towards improving the lot of the people in the region. So it's really good that you're coming here to speak to that report. And obviously we'll be looking to see areas of concern that we'd want to feed back for the next meeting. But we've got some questions, so Councillor Nicholson.
I've been a councillor for a number of years now, and this is probably the worst report I've seen since being a councillor. It gives us absolutely no detail, it gives us absolutely no assurance, gives us absolutely no detail for scrutiny within this. We've got an agenda there that we don't know the background of. We've got words that says, professional advice has been given by officers, some officers, but we don't know if that professional advice has been actually taken, whether it's been refused. We've got this Health and Social Care Clinical and Care Governance Committee is supposed to provide that assurance, and I just don't know what kind of assurance or scrutiny can be done on this paper at all. As I said, it's probably the worst paper I've seen all the time I've been a councillor.
Thanks for that input, Councillor Nicholson. I think there's a couple of points there. One is what do we want to give back to Julie to take away for the next agenda? And the second one is what do we need to see as members in order to perform our role as scrutiny? So I don't know if you want to rephrase that in those terms, maybe?
Well, that's basically the point I was trying to make. But it's very, very hard to know what needs to be done, what needs to be from a scrutiny point of view, and having a look at it so that we can, give a steer, if you want, to what we are looing for. I had a wee look at the Health and Social Care Clinical governance minutes, for example. And, you know, it's maybe just me, because I've been trying to hunt out, and the last minutes I seen was October 17. You know, and the papers, I don't know whether the papers for that committee is actually online, so that maybe council officers can work together to try and pull some detail in that, you know, what actually affects us, how maybe point us in a way that, you know, we can actually look through some of the detail to actually make some comments on it.
Thank you. I'll take a few more questions first, because I think there's going to be a few opinions in this, and then we'll maybe ask Julie and maybe perhaps Lillian to sort of have some input. Councillor Maitland and then Councillor Murray.
Thank you. Well, I think in a way this has been unfortunate. It's come before the Chief Executive's report to us about the arrangements for governance, which we got. If you remember rightly, we asked for an assurance that we would receive that report. I actually wrote to the Chief Executive to ask where it was, but I haven't had a reply yet. So I would like to chase that up. Actually, to be absolutely accurate, I didn't write directly to him. I wrote to the agenda management and asked for the question for it to come through. So maybe it's got lost between agenda management and the Chief Executive. I don't think it's the worst report. I just think it's probably not doing what we asked, if you see what I mean. I think what might have been useful is to have had links directly so that we could have read the clinical and care governance reports online. I'm absolutely with Councillor Nicholson. The minutes are not up there, and it's extremely difficult, which I've actually always said. It's incredibly difficult to find the papers, because nobody really realises that the website is DG Change, and it's really quite difficult to find. So I'm with him on that. I think we need to be completely clear what our role is and what we're expecting, and that maybe is not absolutely clear. I go back to through you to Councillor Nicholson to say I'm with you. I think it needs to be more open so you can see what's happening. But we must remember, actually, that we have delegated certain activities, and that's what we need to be clear about. If there are things which are not being done, then we need to know about it. But I'm with you that this is only just a very sort of a start at this, and it's not absolutely adequate as it stands, because I agree you couldn't get from this report enough information to go back and say whether there are any matters to be referred back. I think it's not actually adequate in terms of supporting the recommendations. But it's a start, but I think we probably need to develop it.
Thank you. Before, I'll just take Councillor Murray, and then we'll maybe absorb that and sort of get some feedback before taking any further questions. Councillor Murray.
Yes, I mean, I have to say I was also a bit disappointed by the report, because there was so little information. All we seemed to be getting was an agenda with quite a large variety of different topics on the agenda, but no access to the minutes of the meeting or the papers presented at the meeting, so we didn't really know what they were about. And if I can take for an example, and I know that Julie did tell us a bit more about what this was in her verbal report, was the review of day services for older people. Now that set alarm bells ringing for me, because I can recall a number of years ago a review of day services for older people in which there were suggestions that a number of day centres and so on were either going to close, or people's the criteria for being able to attend these were going to significantly change. And to see that as a title but with no information about what that's about, I don't know whether constituents are going to start ringing me up and say, am I not going to be able to go to the Cumberland Day Centre any longer? You know, we as elected members, we actually need to have more information on that. So at very least, I would have liked to have seen a link to see what the paper was on that, so I could reassure myself about what that review is all about. And I just wonder whether that could be improved in the future.
Okay, Lauren first, I think, on this one.
Members, just to advise that we had put links on the e-agenda, but I accept that perhaps we weren't clear that you had to go to the DG Change website, so we'll reflect on that, but there was links provided to all of these reports. but I accept that that hasn't clearly been clear to members and given clear direction, so I will reflect on that.
Yeah. Where actually is that in our report? Because I can see what appears to me to be a link to the minute or to the papers which came to the last Social Work Committee, but there's no other links to the papers which came to the meeting of the Clinical and Care Governance Committee on the 23rd, which is actually what I would quite like to have been able to see, and in fact the minute, if the minute was available for that.
We had put the links, but as I say, don't think we've been clear that you had to go to the DD change. It was on the e-agenda, not the actual papers. So I'll reflect on that we need to make sure that members can link into those reports. The minute's not available as yet, but again, we can certainly, with the Chief Operating Officer, have that discussion to make sure the minutes are available. And that has been, unfortunately, we thought the link was there and it's not. So I can only apologise for that matter and ensure for members that we will get copies of all the reports to you. So I apologise for that point.
Thanks, Lillian. Julie, I don't know if you want to add some comments to some of the other points that were raised there.
I would, thank you. I think what's really important, and Councillor Maitland mentioned the work that's been done around the governance, it's really important for this committee to recognise that the scrutiny of the quality and the safety of the services that have been delegated to the IJB, the functions that have been delegated from the local authority, is being undertaken by the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. That's set out clearly within the integration scheme for integration within Dumfries and Galloway and the scheme of delegation that sits beneath it. The purpose of this report, and I appreciate and I apologise, as Lillian does, that members haven't had sight of the papers. I had wrongly assumed that you had links to the papers, so you were able to see the papers that were going forward. But this was to provide you with information in terms of the range of issues that are being considered by the Clinical and Care Governance Committee, and for you to give us feedback if there are any, if you see any gaps. Now, we're in the very early days of that, but it is really important that we're clear about where that scrutiny responsibility sits for those functions that are delegated, and it sits with the Clinical and Care Governance Committee of the IJB. That is set out clearly within the integration scheme. The professional advice that is given and whether or not it's acted upon will be reflected in the minute, and as Lillian has rightly said, the minute of that meeting, it only took place on the 23rd of April, hence why you've got a verbal update from myself rather than a written report within your papers. The minute of that meeting will reflect all of the decisions that were taken and the professional advice that was given to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. The papers for the Clinical and Care Governance Committee, as well as the other committees of the IJB, so the IJB also has a Performance and Finance Committee and an Audit and Risk Committee, and those papers are available on the DG Change website. However, I absolutely take the point that the DG Change website is not the most accessible in terms of the website for the Health and Social Care Partnership. So with our new communications lead for the Health and Social Care Partnership, we're looking to revamp the website and also our web address so that it's far easier for people who want to find out about the Health and Social Care Partnership to access the website, and we will make sure on our refreshed website that there are links to all the papers, which are public papers, that are going to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee, Performance and Finance Committee and the Audit and Risk Committee of the IJB, as well as the IJB papers themselves.
Thank you. I think there's a clearer picture emerging here. Councillor Maitland, do you want to come back in?
Well, I was going to. It's actually, if I can look and see what we are being presented with respect for the recommendations to the Clinical Care Governance Committee. A certain number are for approval. One is for discussion, and the others actually are for noting, because it's my understanding, and I need to be helped with this one. Something like the review of day services for older people, or the Transforming Health and Social Care and Wigtonshire programme. Actually, what was being discussed, I believe, at the Clinical and Care Governance is methodology and quality assurance. Now, that's what I think is being discussed there, because other papers come to other parts of the IJB, and I have to say that I think it's because the legislation has focused it into so few hands. It's incredibly important for the members of the IJB who are elected members to report to their groups, to say to their groups what is happening, and to draw their attention actually to things like the Transforming Health and Social Care and Kinship programme. At the moment, because it's not yet been kind of mature enough to be quite obvious to members where they go and look for that information if they want it themselves. So, I think we're still at early days on this, and I do sympathise with other members because, as I say, it was reduced to too few members, I think, in terms of political representation. But that's done. We can't do anything about it. We've got to deal with what we've got. And one of the things is to keep telling your group what is actually going on. So I think this is only half the story in explaining what the Clinical and Care Governance Committee actually does. And it might be worth picking it apart in the next one that comes and taking a section and saying this is what we are trying to do and this is how we work.
Thank you. I'll let Councillor Nicholson know. I think you were wanting to make a point, Councillor.
Yeah, my point is, I understand, Julie. I do understand, the decision-making process in that. But this isn't just a tick box exercise. This is actually coming to us with to consider these matters so we can refer them back. Now, this is supposed to be helpful. It's not supposed to be a big axe to take to the IGB or the clinical governance. It's so that we can actually have an input, so we can actually try and help, so we can get services that we all want. So it's not, it can't just be a tick box exercise by one-liner paper within that. So, and I do understand, as I said, the decision-making process. And part of that is the health and social care, clinical and care governance. You said it yourself, is to provide quality and effective assurance. Now, the assurance I don't get from that. I can't feed into that. I can't say, yes, I'm really assured with this as a social work member. One of the things that's been touched on, I think, is, yes, how do we get that, and whether it's to go to the IJB or whether we can get some kind of different structures within the IJB, whether it be more members on that IJB, so we can actually drill down, have more committees, more stages, if you want, within the IJB, so that we're actually getting a proper big whole picture in smaller chunks, if you want, and they're getting the scrutiny within the subcommittees of the IJB, with more members from the health board, more members from the council. That type of thing might help.
Councillor Bannister, do you want to come in?
I do a couple of things, Chair. Jane has kind of confused me a bit by suggesting that members should feed back to their groups. My understanding, I wouldn't want to go into this in any detail today, is that as soon as we authorise members to join the IJB, their duty is to serve the IJB, and any feedback should come here rather than to groups, or it should be circulated in a fashion where all members get that information at the same time. The other thing was, unless things have changed, with all these reports, the IJB got hard copy. If that's not changed, I don't see any reason why members here couldn't see the same hard copy, because we've got hard copy for committee reports, and that wouldn't be done to the IJB. I presume it would be done to an agreement, but it's a public document. Members like the idea of having hard copy to study, to mark up, and to refer to. So I don't see why we couldn't have hard copy, and at the same time maybe an executive summary, just outlining the key points or the key decisions in each of the agenda items, because it is an information sharing exercise. That's the whole object of the exercise. And the only other thing I'd be concerned about is how we've, as a committee, asked the IJB to provide us with information, because currently it's, as far as I can see, it's a selective process. The IGB determine what agenda items they will present to social work. For example, there's currently a severe shortage of doctors. What status is that today? I'm not sure. There are issues about pharmacy. There are issues about dental care. And unless we're able to ask the IGB to give us information relating to that, we're working in isolation. I understand fully that it's a responsibility of the IGB. It's just how we get information that might help us to communicate better with the people we represent, because we've got access to these people on the ground that the IGB currently, as an organisation, don't have. They have a communication expert, they have locality managers, but on the ground, within communities, we have a better current access arrangement or engagement arrangement than the Health Board and IGB does. And it's how we get the information that might help us. It might be just to put communities' minds at rest, but nevertheless, if we can't ask for that information, there's no mechanism, there's somehow a disconnect between us and them, for wanting a better word, and I don't want to use that description because that's the last thing we want. It's a partnership, knowing us and them.
Now, I've got another question to come in, but just because there's been a couple of bits of discussion there, but one of the things you said which was of interest, which is the way I read 2.1, which is effectively the Clinical and Care Governance Committee is the one that's monitoring that because that's what we've delegated. So that's already done. So effectively 2.1 is saying we are noting that function's taken place within the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. And at 2.2, and this is what I think, Jim, what you're sort of starting to touch on, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but we may have concerns about doctor or GP recruitment, for example, or about pharmacies and what's happening with that. Is that the type of information that you're expecting this committee to refer back to the Integration Board for consideration? And it's really just to get a sense of how can we make this work, given that you've already done your job, clinical care governance, looking at the delegated functions, but then how can we make this useful? Because we already have area committees, let's not forget, who will have to wait 6 to 9 months to monitor performance in their localities. So how do we kind of tie this in together to make it a stronger partnership, if you like?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things in there. I think there's the difference between the scrutiny of the quality and the safety of the delegated functions, and it's quite clearly set out in the integration scheme about the range of areas that the Clinical and Care Governance Committee has got that responsibility to scrutinise, and I described them in my introduction around risk management, adverse events, comments and complaints, feedback from inspections, etc. And I think that what we need to find a way, as Councillor Nicholson said, we need to find a way of being able to give Social Work Services Committee sufficient detail to give you assurances that that scrutiny is taking place at Clinical and Care Governance Committee. And I absolutely accept that with the absence of the papers and the minute then of the meeting, it is difficult for you to be able to assess whether or not sufficient scrutiny has been undertaken. And I think we can absolutely commit to timetabling these updates in future, remembering that that meeting took place on the 23rd of April this year, timetabling the future reports to making sure that you have access to the papers as well as the minute of that meeting, so that you're able to assess whether or not, in your view, sufficient scrutiny has been undertaken. I think what Councillor Dempster was also alluding to was general issues of interest, concern, frustration that elected members may be hearing from your constituents, or you yourselves may have, about matters or functions that are delegated to the IJB. And I think we need to think as a health and social care partnership about what structures and processes we've got in place to enable you to get that information, because absolutely I want to make sure that you as elected members, if you are concerned about GP recruitment issues in your area, that we are able to give you up to the minute information on what the issues are, the challenges are, and what we're trying to do about it. Now, those are more issues that I would not relate to scrutiny, Those are issues about the ongoing operational delivery of health and social care in your locality, which is really important to you. And I would say the key points of contact around that have to be the health and social care locality managers, and then the general manager for health and social care, who's Graham Abrines, and myself, to give you that. And I absolutely appreciate, and we are working, Chair, you mentioned the issue about the area committees and the reporting to the area committees, and I absolutely appreciate that there is a frustration there as well about the time lag in terms of some of the data that's going to area committees, and we are working on that. But we need to find a way of improving that ongoing engagement and communication with elected members from the Health and Social Care Partnership. And I am willing to listen to anything in terms of any ideas that you have around how that might work. I know that some of the locality health and social care managers have set up regular meetings with the elected members in their area, and they seem to be working well to just make sure that elected members know about the health and social care issues in their locality. They're aware of what the challenges are, they're aware of what the locality manager and their teams are trying to do to address those. So, and I think they're working well in some of the localities, and it might not be universal, Councillor Dempster, and I'm happy to work with the locality managers to try and make sure that we can deliver that across the region. I'm also happy at any point in time if there are specific sort of strategic issues, the likes of our recruitment and retention challenges within the Health and Social Care Partnership. I'm happy for myself and other members of the Health and Social Care Partnership to do workshops, seminars for elected members, to bring you up to date, to do that sharing of information, because it is really important, as you say, in your role as elected members, that you know what the issues are around health and social care in your locality. But I'm just differentiating that from the scrutiny role of the clinical and care governance around the quality and safety of the services that are delegated to it. But I'm happy to take any suggestions, Chair, from any of the elected members about what else would be helpful in terms of getting that regular input about the health and social care issues in their locality, and I can take that back through our partnership structures.
Thanks very much for that, Julie, because I think one of the things, the commitments that you gave there was about the timetable in the reports and minutes, which I think, obviously, that's something we are finding our feet a wee bit with this. This is the first time we've had this report, so I really appreciate that can be done, because that would help at least improve what we've got in front of us for the next meeting. Councillor McKee.
It's just on the timing. It's 3 weeks since this meeting was held. Now, would it be possible for those minutes to be drawn up and us to be notified that they were on the computer and access to them in that period of time prior to Social Work Committee meeting? Because, as I say, it's 3 weeks. If we had been able to get access to the papers, this sort of thing could have been a more open discussion than what we've got today. So I'd just like to leave that with you. If you could, as I say, get it onto the website, give us the access address, and then we can connect onto what we want ourselves.
Councillor Dempster again.
Thanks. Just one brief thing, and I'm happy. I'm delighted with Julie's response, and I will speak to her offline. The only other thing is performance reporting to area committees. Our one just about specifically and exclusively dealt with what would have been social work function, and I wonder if that could be expanded to beyond that, because it's just about a guarantee we will get that here at some stage, so we'll have duplication of performance reporting, and some of the other stuff that we would like to see we'll not have the opportunity to see unless Alison expands beyond what would have been our function in a previous life anyway.
Sorry, the reports that go to the area committees should be about the range of services that are delegated to the Health and Social Care Partnership, and the delivery of the We Will commitments within the locality plans, which cover a whole host of health and social care services within the locality. So I can certainly pick up that issue if you feel that it's too narrow at the moment in terms of what's been presented, Councillor Dempster.
Thanks, Julie.
I don't think I want to open the door to any other questions at the moment, because everybody seems to have been satisfied for now. But obviously there's a few commitments in there in terms of, I think we've noted what was here and the report that you gave. There's a commitment obviously to the improving what we have in front of us at the next meeting and the minuting, etc. And obviously there's been some technical and or other issues about providing the links to the DG Change website, etc. But these are all, it's good that these things happen now, and then we can improve on them, and then the next one will be better. So we can look forward to that. There's clearly areas of concerns. I think there's an offer there to take things up offline. I know Councillor Dempster's wanting to pursue that, and we can go through the route of our locality managers. So I think it's really about how we weave this together into something that works better for everybody. So with that, I think that's we can look forward to better things. Let's say we're happy to at least agree that we've considered, noted, and considered this report. Thank you. If we move onwards then to item 6, which is Kinship Care, and this is to seek approval from members of this committee for a change in the Kinship Care policy and procedure. And I'll pass over initially to Lauren to address this.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that this issue within our Kinship Care policy has been raised through this committee and with independent groups individually. So what we have reflected on is the inequality as part of our policy and procedures, and we have reviewed our policy and procedures, and I hope that members will see this as a positive way forward in ensuring that we've got equity across our Kinship Care policy and procedure. And also reflect on the new way forward. Happy to take questions, and I'd just like to apologise that Stephen Morgan is unable to be with us today. He's had a family emergency and he's had to attend to that. So Sheila, Colleen or myself will try and answer any questions within Stephen's report. Thank you.
Happy to open up to members. Any questions? Councillor Murray.
It's not so much a question actually, but very pleased to see the change in policy. I know there was a lot of concern expressed by a number of members about the discretionary element of support, the fact that families were going for long periods of time caring for kinship children without financial support. So it's good to see that's been taken on board.
Any other questions? Councillor Maitland.
Yes, actually, it's about the rather less about the allowances and a question about the kinship care policy and procedure. Would you let me ask that question?
Of course, yeah.
It's really, I mean, what we're talking about is outcomes for children, and 5.3 we complete the kinship care assessment. What do we do if we really do think that the assessment might have been wrong in the first instance? What do we actually do about it?
Sheila, is that okay for you to pick up?
Clearly, it's a professional assessment that's undertaken with an allocated worker and the kinship carer. There is an option during the assessment period that we could discuss concerns that we may have with that specific kinship carer if we felt that it was not appropriate or it was not the way to go. And I suppose we would look at how to overcome that during that period, during that assessment period. If clearly you will see from the policy that we have also stated that should an assessment be completed and submitted to panel and we don't agree with that, then we can actually decline or not approve that assessment. Families have a right of an appeal, and we would expect them to, only fair to have that right of appeal, but ultimately that then would be a decision that would be taken by a subsequent panel in order to confirm whether they wish to review that decision or whether they wish to uphold that decision. And I think is an appropriate level of scrutiny within the policy that actually gives that option, because otherwise it would just be seen as a rubber stamping of all assessments that come through, and there has to be a professional element of scrutiny to that.
Sorry. I beg your pardon. Councillor Maitland, did you want to come back?
No, don't worry. I'll ask about it later, because it's not really directly to do with the actual recommendations. Thank you.
We'll have the only question. It's more just for reassurance for members, etc. But there's obviously the sum of 145,000 in 3.9, which is in reference to back payments to 67 kinship carers. I presume this is a one-off payment and it's to be absorbed within existing resources, just for the comfort of members.
I'll answer that, Chair, if that's acceptable. Yeah, this is a one-off payment for us to ensure that all of those kinship carers that have fit within the outcome of the SPSO finding will be compensated, and it is a one-off payment that has been recognised and identified within the social work current budget.
Okay, with that in mind then, can we be happy to agree the revised kinship care policy, and also at 2.2 that kinship allowances will be made from the date of placement for eligible carers rather than the date of endorsement by the agency decision maker as detailed in 3.9. Agreed, thank you. Item 7 is the minute of the meeting from Adult Support and Protection Committee. Are we happy to note that? Thank you. And item 8 is the minute of the meeting of 22nd of January for the Child Protection Committee. Are we happy to note that? Thank you. I have no further business. Thanks for your time today, members, and a safe onward journey. Bye-bye.